Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Drew Williams. I'm the marketing manager for Kobiton, and thank you for joining us on yet another webinar. Today, we are featuring Testing Times, one of our newer Kobiton partners, specifically the founder and one of the principal engineers there is Anne-Marie Charet. She'll be talking to us today about quality and what that means to be a team responsibility. In addition to Anne-Marie, we'll also have the Kobiton CTO, Frank Moyer, on the line, talking a bit about what Kobiton is building to aid in that process. And so without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Anne-Marie so she can give you a brief intro about testing times.
Thanks, that's fantastic. Thanks, Drew. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Anne-Marie Charet. I've been in the software testing quality space for a long time. I am one of the co-founders of Testing Times. We run a software testing consultancy based in Sydney, but we are travel worldwide. And we're really here to provide quality engineering optimization approaches. And that's just a fancy way of saying that we'll help you in a lot of your transformation situations. So say, for example, you might be moving to from a waterfall type approach in your agile, and you want to move to an agile process. So we can certainly help you look at your testing, because one of the things that we've identified is that it's kind of easy for agile process to be implemented, but what the hell do we do with that big chunk of software testing right at the end, and how do we make that agile? So really we help looking in that space. And more recently, we're doing a lot of work in helping companies move to continuous deployment. So again, we've got the situation where there's still all that testing that needs to be done, and how can we not drop quality and still also deploy, say, 3 or 10 times a day. And sure, test automation is part of that solution, but it's not the only one. And so we help organizations transition and move into that space. We do managed services. We provide managed services in product management, development, and also in, obviously, software testing as well. Professional hires, and we have a large capability uplift department where we provide training and coaching for companies that want to help perform those types of services in-house. We help you transition. But enough about that. You don't want to hear about testing times all day. We're here to talk about quality, it being a team responsibility. This is a talk that I gave recently at CAST in Florida. It's dear to my heart because I see this phrase, it's nearly become a mantra, hasn't it? Quality is everyone's responsibility. And certainly that's a kickback against those days when we had the tester as the gatekeeper, and it was that concept of you shall not pass, and the tester was responsible for the quality of the product. And it was nearly like they prevented software from releasing. And that just doesn't work anymore today, does it? I mean, think about, we want to deploy rapidly. We don't want blockers to speedy deployment. We want a frictionless, smooth deployment process that we can easily do without having that anxiety of having a big surprise right before a release. And so this phrase really moves to that. It suggests that rather than having the one person, the gatekeeper, who becomes the blocker, we now have a team that's looking at quality and is responsible for quality. But I think there's a lot to this. What exactly does that mean? Does that just mean everyone does testing? Because certainly I see that in some places, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's one approach. But I feel that if we are serious about moving to continuous deployment, if we are serious about being able to deploy rapidly, we need to start unpeeling this a bit more and exploring this a bit deeper. And that's the focus of this talk today. All right, so we have to start with the definition. And I think this is important, that we look at what software testing is. This is a great definition by Kem Kainer. It's my favorite one. And the reason why I like this definition so much is that it focuses on the keyword investigation to suggest that software testing, we need to investigate and understand in order to be able to provide the second keyword, information. So software testing is about providing information, isn't it? If you think about the sorts of things that we're providing information on is the state of quality. And typically that's the product under test. So we're performing experimentation for a purpose. We're performing software testing in order to be able to understand the state of quality. And I think this is important because so often we conflate the two. And we think of software testing and we equate that to quality. They're the same thing. But that's not really true, is it? If you think about, say you find a bug, right? You do some software testing and you discover the bug. If that bug doesn't get fixed, it does absolutely nothing to help improve or change the state of quality, does it? Everything remains exactly the same. So it's the fact that when you act on the information that software testing brings you, that your state of quality changes. So software testing and quality, though they're very, very close and they're linked, they're not necessarily the same thing. And I think that this answer to how do we maintain quality, how do we improve quality while we deploy rapidly, I think the answer to doing that lies in that distinction. This is a phrase, software testing is the headlights of the project. In 2001, there was a really groundbreaking book written called Lessons Learned in Software Testing, written by Kainer, Petticord, and Bach. And one of the first lessons is that software testing is the headlights of the project. And what it meant by that was that software testing was there to shine a light on all that information that will help us understand risk and the state of quality in the project. And if you imagine going down a dark road at night, and maybe it's foggy and you can't see, and the road is, you know, you've never been down this road before, and there's a lot of uncertainty around. Headlights are super, super important and super useful. So they help us see what's happening, and they help us see the journey ahead in the road. And that information helps us get to our destination. But what happens if it's in the middle of the day and the road is straight? Do we really need headlights? Or what happens if we have a flat tire, or there's no petrol in the tank, or maybe we don't even know how to drive, or the battery is flat? There are lots and lots of different things where headlights are not useful. And it really doesn't matter whether the headlights are working or not because we can't move. So clearly there's more to the picture than just the headlights, right? We need to have the whole car working in order for us to be able to get our journey, to get to our destination. And if you think about the things that provide information to us, there's lots and lots of things that we're using as we're driving to help us find information. You know, we're using the fuel gauge to help us see whether there's petrol in the tank or not. We're using a GPS to help us see how far we are in our journey and in our and how far we still have to go and where we should be going. So we're using lots of things within the car to help us understand how far we have to go and the state of the car at that point in time. And quality is the same thing, and software testing. Because if you think about, imagine, here's a thought exercise for you. Imagine that you could not do any software testing. How would you know the state of quality? What other things could you be doing to help you understand about the state of quality of your system. And this is really what we want to do, is we want to explore other avenues that we can look at to help us understand whether we have quality right from day one. And some of the things that we could be looking at is, are we actually building the right product? You know, if you think about that, the cost of actually developing a feature, the cost of actually developing and maintaining that feature is hugely expensive. So what we want to be doing is making sure through in our product management that we're actually developing the right features. And we want to be doing lean thinking, design thinking, and looking at how can we experiment and how can we know that we fully understand our customer and that we're actually building the right product in the first place. And once we have that understanding, we also want to be then looking at, so like, how do we know that we're building it right? And that's where, you know, we're looking at, we can do static analysis, we can looking at lots of different ways that we can actually start exploring the state of quality without necessarily performing software testing. Code reviews, peer reviews, these sorts of things help us really understand the state of quality in different avenues. And finally, something that often gets forgotten and overlooked is being able to support the product when it's in production. And the quality in that space, how can we make that really easy to support our products when they're out there in the wild? So we want to look at holistically quality in all these different ways and see if we can help improve quality in all those aspects. Because the worst thing that can happen to us is that we find surprises right before our release. The surprises are bad, not necessarily because we found the surprises, it's because no one's got a lot of time to act on that change. So we want to be able to help improve the state of quality and make it visible right from as early as possible, and to be able to see that state of quality early on. So I like to say that software testing gives us visibility, right? So it's those headlights. Yes, it absolutely does. And software testing is essential and really important. But as I said, it's only one aspect of the story. Quality tells us how far we have to go. So that we have this concept of quality being a forever changing thing. And that it's constantly moving and that we're moving towards a destination. So we talked a lot about quality and we've had a definition of software testing, but what exactly is quality? And I love this definition by Jerry Weinberg, where it talks about quality is value to some person. And I like this because of the subjective nature of what it means about quality. And I understand this makes it quite hard to measure, but if you think about it, this is so true. Like when you think about what is quality for one person can be very, very different to what quality means for someone else. And there's a lot of things that will have an impact on what people think is a quality product. When we're working at a team level, this is so true as well. So if you think about quality as value to some person in a team, who are the people on your team who are thinking about quality? And this is so important because quality is everyone's responsibility. And we need to be understanding what quality is at a team level from our different team members. So I like this definition that quality is value to some person. I like this additional statement that quality is value to some person who matters. And this was added by Michael Bolton, and I like this because it really helps us focus on who are the people that matter. Clearly, we can't think about quality in the terms of everyone who is actually using or providing input into the product, but we can focus on the people who are going to have a direct impact on quality or who really matter. So you think about who matters, right? Obviously our consumers. These are the people that we care about, and we want to be able to provide good quality for them. But we've also got people who have an impact on quality, as I mentioned, is our developers, right? They clearly, I clearly believe that everyone cares about quality, but somehow it looks different to different people. So what people value as quality can be different depending on the type of work they do. So developers, for example, really have a passion for potentially clean code, right? And so creating clean, clear, easily readable code is something that they truly care about and value. So understanding that when we talk about quality, it's potentially they're thinking about it in that context. And in the same way, a product owner will be thinking about product in terms of their consumer. And how is that feature? How will that feature do in once it's released? And finally, from a support perspective, they have a slightly different perspective on quality too, right? Because they're thinking about how can we support this in production? And you'll find that there's a tension between what, say, a development team might see as quality and what a support team might see as quality. So for example, a development team might be looking to deploy rapidly. So for them to reduce risk, it makes sense to deploy as frequently as possible. But the challenge with that is that this drives up potentially the uncertainty. And so from a support perspective, there's more change happening. And from someone who's trying to maintain consistency and reliability, these things don't necessarily improve their state of quality. So I think it's really important to understand this and have conversations with people in support to help them include them into this conversation of quality. And how can we make their life easier by improving quality for them so they still can do their job well and maintain the systems that are being developed. Okay, we're going to deconstruct this a bit. Quality is value to some person. It can be challenging for some people because it is quite subjective. And as I said, if we want to measure and understand quality, how do we actually break that down? We want to break that down into ways that we can easily measure it and easily talk about it. More and more, I've been looking at this problem. And as I said, you know, we talk about quality often in terms of product. And more, I'm starting to look at, well, actually, that's important. I mean, obviously, consumers and having quality products is essential, but there are so many different aspects to quality that impact the quality of a product. And we know on reflection this to be true. Here's an example. When we're working as a team together, if there's, say, you've got a cross-functional team and you have developers in the team and maybe there's one tester on the team. If that one tester doesn't have the psychological safety to feel safe and to speak up, the chances are that that tester, when they find a bug, they will find it hard to speak their mind if they feel that they're not, that what they say is going to be ignored or dismissed. And so creating a team environment where and a healthy, safe environment where people feel comfortable and safe to speak up and speak out about concerns is vital to improving quality. So here's one example of how a team operates together can directly improve or impede product quality. And so in the same way, we have lots of different things within our systems, within how we work, with how we operate, the environments we work within that have an impact on quality. And so we want to start looking at those too, to be able to improve quality in all these different areas. So for example, sure, there's product quality, but there's also more and more the way we develop our tools and our technologies are having a huge impact on being able to have a huge impact on the state of quality. So looking at our infrastructure, infrastructure as code, infrastructure as software now. So how is the quality of that? And how do we, importantly, how do we know whether we have good quality in our infrastructure? I think these are going to become one of the vital areas that we become more and more involved in. Secondly, our test environments. How easy and hard is it for us to spin up test environments and to be able to make it easy for people to do software testing? Looking at our test data and having ways and approaches that help us to quickly spin up test data or quickly automate or quickly create test data as we need it. And finally, looking at all our practices and our approaches to how we perform testing. Our approaches, our agile practices, our development practices are the things that we can do in those spaces that will help us improve quality. So we can see that quality actually is impacted by a lot of different things, not only the product. One of the things that I've been working with my customers is to have something what I call a quality workshop, where we explore all of this. And really at a high level, what we'll do is I bring the key stakeholders into a room, and we have these very conversations about what is quality and what do they value and what's important to them. And through methods of prioritization, I help identify how we're going to start working together at a stakeholder level on all these different things. And it's fascinating because this is where you start seeing the differences of opinion about what quality matters to these people. And there's a little bit of echo there. But so quality, yeah, so looking at quality from, the security and looking at the security specialists who come in and talk about, well, what they value from a quality perspective versus somebody who's working in operations, and having those discussions and understanding the conflicts or the differences of opinion in quality. It goes a huge way to help having a shared understanding of what quality is, but it also helps people start prioritizing and deciding and agreeing on, yes, well, we agree that these are our priorities from a quality perspective. So having those conversations from day one before we even enter into developing features and products is really useful for the whole team to understand where they come from. There's changes to afoot as well. As I've talked quite a bit about continuous deployment, but really, I think one of the things that I'm really seeing is that the need for a speed to market. What's driving this is that our businesses have to be able to respond to change really rapidly. Whereas they might have had a roadmap for the 9 to 12 months ahead of them, and that they had a lot of uncertainty in the past. More and more what's happening is that there's uncertainty in their sphere too, and they don't necessarily have all the answers. So they need to be able to react and respond to market demand. And this means that as that pressure comes down to us in tech, where we have to be able to respond to their requests and their changes. So be able to respond rapidly and provide those changes rapidly to market are becoming really important. And one of the things I'm saying is that we in the quality space need to respond to that. In fact, what I say now is that really that quality, the speed to market is one of the new quality attributes, right? So that instead of actually becoming an impedance to speed to market, maybe we should start trying to look at how can we assist companies in speedily deploying to market as a quality attribute? Do we fully understand? Are there ways that we can help improve that? And I am convinced that we in the quality space can provide so much value here. One of the reasons why I say that is because I know that a lot of people in software testing have looked at ways in improving how we do software testing. We've removed huge amounts of waste in software testing. Think about those heavy test strategies and project plans that we used to create. We've really peeled that apart, and we've explored to look to see how we can add value in that space without doing those heavy processes. So in the same mentality, we can apply that mindset to how can we actually help improve speed to market by removing waste. So I think this is one of the key things that we can be helping in. Another quality attribute is recoverability, and I love this one. Elizabeth Hendrickson wrote an amazing blog post where she talks about recoverability over perfection. And what she's saying there is that rather than trying to get perfect software out the door right before as you release, it's maybe, just maybe, it's okay. Maybe it's okay for us to release the product. We know there's bugs in our products anyway. We know we release. It's just that maybe now what we say is, instead of putting all our efforts into try and getting exhaustive software testing before we release, maybe it's better to start putting our focus on how do we recover rapidly from a problem once it happens. And I think this is really one of the secrets to our shift in thinking when we look at continuous deployment, when we look at the complexity of the systems that we're trying to deploy today. It's just impractical for us and hugely expensive for us to try and attempt to do exhaustive testing to cover all those things. And some of these race conditions are really, really hard to identify and find. And so rather than saying, no, we're not going to release until we have this perfect software, maybe what we'll say is, let's focus our energy into being able to recover from those problems. So how in the testing space or how in the quality space can we help with that? You know, are we performing in experiments in this space? Do we even know how long it takes for us to be able to recover from problems? Are we actually providing tests that will test for recoverability? So these are the sorts of things that we can start exploring. A very close cousin to recoverability is our ability to observe, especially in production. So how are we good at identifying the unknown unknowns in production? And I'm not talking about monitoring here. Monitoring helps us see what we expect. It's like validating, you know, it's a bit like validating in software testing. Monitoring, we know what to access and we're looking at it. Observability is more about helping identify what we don't know. So, and being able to find that information really rapidly. So I would urge anyone in the software testing and the quality space to be looking at this and finding ways to understand about observability. And there's a lot of similarities between observability and exploratory testing. In my mind, there's a very similar mindset, a slightly different context, but the same sort of ideology is behind both. And finally, there's, you know, looking at understanding how can we make quality visible. And this is, to me, one of the important things, as I mentioned, is about how can we help us able to see the state of quality at any point in time. We know that software testing helps us provide information on the state of quality. We know that there are other ways of doing that too, maybe peer reviews, static analysis, these sorts of things. So how can we actually gather information from day one to help us see the state of quality as we progress? Because looking at state of quality at one point of time provides some value, but the real value is being able to see that state of quality over time rather than just at one point in time. That's what we're really interested in. So having conversations about how can we make this easier for people to see. And certainly I'm looking at organizations who are really starting to explore ways of creating dashboards in that quality space to help make quality more visible. There's also new threats to quality. So some here haven't changed that much, but I think what's happened is that their importance hasn't changed. So, so having security, for example, has become such a vital thing. We know this is that our ability to have secure systems is really challenging today, and that has really upped our game. You know, where we, you know, even 5-10 years ago, security was a nice thing to have. Now it's an absolutely essential part, to the point where we have board members, or we have people on the board who are having advisors on security, so they can understand the state of security of their systems. So we want to be able to be providing information in this space, and if we're not doing so, we certainly need to start exploring how we can do that. Usability becoming more important as well, but other threats to quality, and some of these you'll identify, you know, just having bloated processes, having, you know, having things that you do because this is how we've always done them, and challenging those things and saying, well, hang on a second, these actually impact our ability to deliver a quality product. What can we do about it? What is the value in doing those processes, and why are we doing them? An interesting one to look at and explore is story splitting. One of the things that we're driving to, and I see a real trend to us wanting to perform software testing in isolation to other, so we can deploy in isolation. So if you think about a microservices architecture, we have a bounded context, and we want to be able to deploy without having to worry about really the other microservices around us. So we're deploying in isolation. So in order to be able to do that, we want to make sure that we can test in isolation. We don't want to have to wait for all the other systems to be in place so that we can do a test, or we can understand the state of quality. So if we take that back to looking at story splitting, it's having those conversations about how are we going to test this as we're splitting stories. And potentially we could be looking at ways in able to help us split the stories in a way that makes it easier for us to test in the future. So easier for us to be able to create those mocks and stubs that we need in order to be able to test in isolation down the track. And certainly we want to be exploring how we can improve the quality in that space. Again, talked about maybe, you know, our ability to, you know, if it's going to take us a long time to recover from a problem in production, that potentially is a bigger problem than, you know, than finding the bug beforehand. So we want to start looking at these things, start looking at how we can actually start breaking down these threats to quality and start improving quality in that regard. So where do the software testers sit in this space? Does that mean that, you know, we don't have, because, you know, we're basically not going to be having testers in the future? Certainly, I have met some organizations who are moving to that space, but I still believe that there's huge value in software having software testers within your organization. One of the key things, though, that is the role is changing. And I definitely see a trend to, whilst you might be performing software testing in your team, one of the other things you'll be doing is also help other people perform testing as well. So the role as a software tester, your role is changing and it's morphing, but there is always a need for someone in a team or within an organization to be identifying potential threats to quality, to be advocating for quality, to be thinking about what quality is and how we're going to measure and make it visible, to, as I said, to investigate threats to quality and to provide that information and bubble it up. So absolutely, there is a role for software testing and what I call risk investigators or quality advocates in our teams. But as I said, it does look different. And more I see this concept of having a quality coach. And this is really someone who has that risk identification, someone who's thinking about, well, what are the threats to quality? What is quality in our organization? What does quality mean to us? And how are we identifying threats to that quality? How are we thinking critically through those problems and providing experiments in that space? How can we understand better what quality means from stakeholders? And having that sort of coaching role where you're actually going and helping other people. There could be developers on your team, there could be business people on your team, helping them perform testing too. And really being that quality advocate within your organization. And finally, we cannot forget our consumers. Understanding that, you know, whilst we have a tendency, well, we're looking to breaking things down, we're looking to deconstruct quality, we're looking to make it easier for us to test in isolation. All these things are vitally important to help us be able to understand the state of quality. We can never forget that at the end of the day, our consumers, and that we are providing a service to them that that they need to be able to get their jobs done. So being that advocate of the consumer, thinking about no matter how much we could deconstruct what we do, someone needs to be thinking about the system as a whole. Someone needs to be thinking about that product as a whole and being able to advocate for that consumer in that regard. Removing waste, as I talked about, we can be, as I said, we're great at doing this. We have a tradition already when we look at our heavy software testing processes where we have removed waste. So let's take that thinking, let's take that and apply it at a broader scale to our organizations. How can we improve quality by removing waste? Maybe it's in your build times. Maybe it's taking your test automation is taking an awful long time to run. Are there things that can be done in that space to improve quality in that regard? Are you looking at huge bloated regression test suites? Maybe it's time to retire some of those regression test suites. I think sometimes we have this inherent fear of retiring tests because they've actually being useful in the end. So maybe somebody's created a test because a bug was found in production. But sitting back and looking critically through your regression test suite and saying, you know, are there things in there that actually we really do not need anymore? And maybe we can retire some of this automation and improve the speed that way. Is there duplication in our tests? You know, are we actually repeating that same test 2 or 3 times because it has a tendency to be flaky and we're not sure about the result? Or maybe what we could do is identify the root cause of flakiness and start gradually chipping away at that and removing those problems. And in doing so, improve the speed time of our test execution. We want to make quality improvement visible. And now, I've been around a while and I remember ISO 9001. I'm not sure if anyone of you out there remembers that too, but really this was ISO 9001 had this sort of quality engineering concept, which was basically a PMO office for a field dictated what quality would look like and how to perform it. And it was very much a very formal gated methodology that was imposed onto teams. And one of the key things in that quality engineering process was that all the teams had to be the same. This is just, it never worked then, and it's certainly not going to work today. We want to be able to look at how can we make quality visible at a team level. So having the teams actually be responsible for quality means you give them the autonomy to be able to start making decisions about how they're going to act on quality, how they're going to make it visible, and how they're going to measure it. So handing that over to the team, looking at how we can make quality visible right from the start. And sometimes, you know, stopping ourselves from trying to do a huge project on quality. and instead splitting it down into small, easily identifiable, cheap experiments that we can gradually start making, collecting data and understanding better what quality means. A nice example of this is if you think about performance testing. Typically in the past, performance testing has required that we have every single system that we have on. It may be, so in end-to-end, from an end-to-end perspective, that might be a huge amount of systems that we string together, and we do performance testing from an end-to-end perspective. Hugely expensive, time-consuming, and it takes a long time, and identifying root causes of problems is a real challenge in these sorts of situations. So breaking down performance testing to potentially looking at it from, say, a unit level. So say a developer is measuring performance at every time they perform a commit. And looking at that, maybe if they pull down a third-party library and suddenly the actual time to execute performance drops significantly, being able to capture those early on improves the enables us to gradually understand quality, the performance at that level, rather than relying only on this massive end-to-end performance test. And that means that potentially what you can do is you can start scaling back the size of that end-to-end testing, and you could only do it on maybe core areas rather than trying to do performance testing in a lot of different areas. So breaking down improvements into small chunks rather than having one big change. Very briefly, this is some ways we can start making quality visible. So if you think about quality in terms of understanding what are the outcomes that we want from quality, and what are the tasks that we could do in order to achieve that quality outcome, and then what are the experiments and what are the initiatives that we can apply that help us to identify and provide information that feeds back into all these areas. So if you think about quality, as we talked about before, in all those different areas, we could then start breaking down these things into tasks that we can start to action on. So, for example, say one of the things that we wanted was to be able to deploy weekly. Maybe at the moment we're deploying fortnightly, and our goal is to deploy weekly. In order to be able to do that, we need to reduce our end-to-end testing by, say, 30%. So breaking that down, well, what's the outcome from that? What are the tasks that we could do? Well, we need to have some isolated components, and maybe we need to start looking at doing some testing earlier on. So some experiments that could be formed in those spaces would be to looking at the end-to-end tests, saying, well, what bugs are they actually finding right now? Maybe the end-to-end tests aren't finding any bugs. Maybe over the past year, they haven't found anything. Or maybe they have found bugs, but on investigation, it turns out that those bugs could be easily found at a function level. So performing that sort of investigation and providing that information to help us make a decision about what we're going to do next. Maybe when we want to look at something like PACT for our APIs, some sort of contract testing, where we can actually test the APIs as we're doing commits, or as, you know, so in our build times, we're actually performing some tests on the API level, and maybe that will help us test earlier. So create one mock, perform that experiment, provide that information back to the team, and help see with data to provide. Now that you have data, you can start making informed decisions about what you're going to do about quality. And maybe you might decide, well, you know what, let's not tackle the end-to-end tests. Maybe we'll focus on testing earlier. Maybe that's where we need to put our energy. So we're creating a strategy that is flexible and allows us to change as we get more and more information on the state of quality. We want our quality to we want to be able to measure quality. We want to be able to help people understand. Quality is so hard to see and understand, isn't it? And sometimes that can be a real challenge, because if we don't make quality visible, people will interject their version of what quality is. So you might find that the finance person will start thinking about quality in terms of cost. And it's on us to be able to make this information understandable to people, to our stakeholders, and to find ways to communicate what quality means in their terms. At a team level, we want to be looking at quality at a team context rather than at a company level. We think of measuring quality in terms of understanding it, understanding quality, then using it as validating it or using it as a benchmark. So the concept of understanding quality and be able to learn about it rather than using it as a method to potentially measure people, which would be really not a good thing, but rather measuring a team at a team level, understanding where our quality is at a team level. We want to align metrics or any form of measurement to our business outcomes, as opposed to looking at things in isolation to that. And finally, not to be afraid to drop metrics if they don't work. I think there's been so much damage done with metrics in the past. I see, if you look at the past of software testing, we've had some terrible ways of measuring quality in the past, and we certainly don't want to go back to those days. However, not having anything is not a good solution either. So we want to be having conversations with our stakeholders about how can we help them understand what quality is, and how can we help them understand the state of quality at any point in time, because these are important things. They want to understand this, they want to know this information, and so how can we help them make that visible to them? I love this quote from John Cutler, because to me, it helps us focus on the things that are really adding value from a business perspective. Sometimes we get so obsessed with getting something done and getting it released that we forget why we're developing that feature in the first place. From a business perspective, there's really 4 things that our businesses care about. One is earning more revenue. And if it's not earning it, we want to be retaining it, right? And on the other side, there's reducing cost, or at least preventing the cost from going up. So if we think about quality in those terms, how are we doing in that regard with providing information in that space? Rather than looking at a feature being done, maybe we could start looking at investigating and understanding quality in terms of this, rather than quality in terms of, yes, it's been released. And if we did do that, what would that look like? What would the experiments look like? How do we test? What would be different? These are things that really would be interesting to explore. And so just to kind of put this all together, because there's a lot of different things we looked at today, but to put it all together, I like to encapsulate it with this. Yes, absolutely, software testing are the headlights. We need headlights. Headlights can be really important, especially when we don't know. There's a high degree of uncertainty and there's a high degree of risk. We want to do as much software testing as possible. But let's not forget why, right? We have headlights because we're on a journey and there's a destination in mind. And that destination is driven by our business outcomes. So software testing is the headlights. Quality, yes, is the journey, but the business outcomes are the destination.
Hey, Anne-Marie, thank you so much for all that very insightful information. Great stuff. But right before we turn it over to questions, we're going to hear from the CTO of Kobiton, Frank Moyer. He's going to piggyback a bit off of what Anne-Marie said and how it applies to mobile, and then also talk a bit about some of the unique challenges faced in that regard. So with that, I'll turn it over to Frank very quickly.
Thank you very much, Drew. And thank you very much, Anne-Marie. I very much enjoyed your presentation, and I loved watching you at CAST last month. And thank you for participating in our webinar today. I'm going to piggyback, as Drew mentioned, piggyback off of what you said. I actually love the style, so I try to keep it in line with your style and presentation. I can't replicate your wonderful accent, but I'll do my best to present. So we talk about quality and how it's different from other aspects of development. You know, Anne-Marie, you mentioned, wouldn't it be great if you could get some developers to participate and help out with testing? So when we talk about quality being a team responsibility, why is that different than you know, support? Why support's somewhat a team responsibility. Everybody needs to lend a hand, but in deployment, you know, you're not going around saying, hey, everybody, let's deploy this together. Or coding, you know, people are coding their own pieces while you could come to a developer and say, help out with, you know, just why don't you do some manual testing? A developer wouldn't go to a tester and say, hey, why don't we do some coding together? So, you know, quality is unique in that regard, but why? And in my view, it's because quality is accessible. And what are the things that make quality accessible? First are the skills that allow it to be accessible. People, it's easier to pick up manual testing skills on an application. It's the environment. So you don't have to have a whole development environment, or you don't have to have security set up to support deployment into a separate environment. There's also domain expertise. You know, you need to know the domain, and you have to have the tools available, and it's easier to get access to those tools. So all of those components, those facets of quality or testing, makes it more accessible. You know, if you look at these and you know, is coding have these capabilities? Is that accessible? Well, I would argue that, you know, in a lot of respects, it fails. Coding fails in terms of skills. You know, it's not very accessible. You have to have skilled developers. You have to have the environment set up. Support, same thing. So quality sort of sits unique on its own there. And when we look at mobile testing specifically, I want to drill into this a little bit, specifically around these facets and what it means in terms of manual testing, what tools are needed, you know, defect tracking and real devices. You know, you can't do effective mobile testing without real devices. On the skills side, experience as well as training. And for environment, security, and you need the actual mobile application. Kobiton provides real devices, so anybody can access a real device through a browser interface without having to purchase those, you know, $1,000 device. And that access to real devices naturally leads into experience, right? The more you can just launch an application without having to go figure out how to get the IPA or the APK file loaded onto the real device and test, allows you to get more experience and build your skills in manual testing. And then just access to the mobile app in a test environment. We take this for granted, how easy it is to get access to a mobile app, but oftentimes it's very difficult. So with Kobiton, you can automatically install the app on the mobile device from your app repository and run your tests. Well, what happens when you start to grow and you've got, you know, a set of manual testers? You want to speed things up. You want to get back to what one of the things Anne-Marie said. You know, there are demands from the business to get to new features faster. And with automation in place, all of a sudden, all those skills that were built during manual testing, now we find a new set of skills. Somebody who has skills to write automation scripts, who knows how to write Appium. And we now, there's an abrupt shift from what we did in manual testing to this now investment and effort in shifting the organization to automation. So that's in terms of tooling, those real devices are being accessed through automation. Skills are now, a lot of it's through automation. and the installation and use of that mobile app is all done through automation. But I don't, we at Kobiton don't think it needs to be that abrupt. Where what if all this was not lost in the transition to automation? What if we could maintain the same same flexibility we had with manual testing when we made that shift to automation? And what does that look like? It means that when we shift automation, that the manual tester has access to real devices and can, after they run those manual tests, convert those automatically to automation. But it's not just at that point, right? It's not for just a release, but for the ongoing releases after that, the ability to self-heal that automation with new application releases. We're working with a client right now who has 60 manual testers working around the clock 5 days a week. And we're looking to leverage the platform that we're building so that they can have 60 developers run exploratory tests on a set of devices, 5 devices, and then throughout the night, rerun those manual tests, those exploratory tests, against 100 other device types. So, that ability, what's unique about mobile is you're trying to test across many different device types to get the coverage that you want to get for your user base. And using the technology we are building at Kobiton, you can get there, and you can get there faster. You can deploy that new release much faster and more predictably. So thank you very much. Just wanted to go through that quickly, and we'll hand over back to Drew.
Awesome. Thank you, Frank. And again, thank you, Anne-Marie. I am going to go ahead and turn it over to questions now. We saw that we had a couple come in. It looks like this one was directed at you, Anne-Marie. What's your opinion on a zero bugs policy? If a bug isn't going to be fixed now, should it be deleted and not saved in a bug backlog?
Yeah, I actually, this is a really interesting approach. And I was talking to, when we were at CAST, we actually had a bit of a workshop, and one of the testers, Marette, came up with how they only have 4 bugs in their backlog. And it kind of blew my mind that, they would have so few. I've worked in very few organizations that have so few bugs in their backlog. And the reason why they did that was that the cognitive overload of having bugs in the backlog, which we tend to not think about. And I think this is really interesting, knowing that you have all these bugs there, just knowing that they're there, they need to be fixed, they need to be given attention, they need to be triaged, they need to be assessed, prioritized, all these sorts of things have weight on us. And they actually drag us down because we know that there's work there that we're not doing. So rather than having that cognitive overload, it's fix it straight away. Just fix the bug when there and then. It's to some degree, getting that out of the way, out the door, and moving on is much easier than having those conversations about should we fix it or is it a bug and that sort of thing. Now that, I think there's context in that, and there's situations. Somebody was in the medical space and they were like, oh, I can't believe you only have 4 bugs, and we have 200 minimum. And clearly there's different contexts that allow you to do that or not, but generally I think you can definitely explore that concept and have conversations about, what would that look like, and can we do that, and why can't we do? If we can't do that, what is stopping us from doing that? Because certainly that having that less amount of work that you should be doing is hugely beneficial from someone who has a never-ending Trello board with cards everywhere. Just knowing that the dread of opening that Trello board to see all those cards that I haven't yet done. And then seeing that miraculously removed and the weight being taken off you would be a really fantastic thing, I think.
Awesome. Okay. Next question comes with a compliment, and I think this is also directed at you, Anne-Marie. Great slides on the outcomes and how you want to achieve them. However, with regards to deploy weekly, why was automation not part of the quality outcome, and how come you only have one quality outcome per outcome?
So that was just a very rough kind of demo of just to demonstrate the types of thinking. Certainly, I think when you're looking at deploying rapidly, automation has a huge place in part. I'm a big fan of putting automation in where it's very useful. But on the other hand, I think we can't also, just to flip that, we can't forget that exploratory testing is one of the fastest feedbacks we can get. And sometimes in our desire to automate everything, we forget that should we automate everything? And definitely wanting to have those conversations about when is the right time, when's the not right time to automate something that you want to be having constantly within your organizations. It's the never-ending conversation, I feel. So yes, absolutely, automation is key, especially at the lower levels. I think there's interesting work being done at the GUI level with automation. I mean, my experiences of GUI automation have been pretty horrendous in the past, and they're brittle and they're hard to maintain. They're hard to identify root causes and things like that. And certainly my advocacy at that level is that you want to try and reduce your end-to-end tests. You want to try and push those tests down into the lower levels where you can isolate and create mocks and stubs and make it easier to test. So the real benefit, though, is it's easier to find the root cause of problems. And that's that, fast feedback becomes shorter if you do that. So trying to push that sort of automation down is a good thing in general. But I know that there are new tools out there that are helping in that space. I don't have a lot of experience in them or information on them, but I certainly think they'd be interesting to explore.
Awesome. Okay. Next question. Again, another compliment and directed at you, Anne-Marie. I really like the part about the visibility of testing efforts. Could you please give me more ideas on how to make it more visible?
Look, depending, I think first of all, have that conversation about what quality is. Like trying to make it visible without understanding what people care about, that's kind of going to be much harder. It's going to be hit and miss. When I go into new work, the first thing I want to do is try and understand what is blocking people, what's stopping people, good people, getting work done. Why is it so hard? What is it the thing that the devs really hate? And I work on that, right? Because if I can help improve in that space, I immediately get brownie points, right? I'm actually providing instant value to those developers. So if I can work on those spaces and improve and make that visible, that's where I would start. I think you start by understanding what you don't know. So if you don't have any data in that space, the first thing you want to do is find out, how do we collect data in this space? What cheap experiment can I do to be able to give an understanding of what we don't know, right? So a classic situation would be look at your systems and pick a system, speak to the team and say, how do we identify, how do we know if we have good or poor quality in this space? So what is quality for us? And then point to a system and say, how do I know? How do we know if that's got poor quality? How do we know if there's a problem there with respect to whatever it is, security, whether it's speed of transactions, whatever. And then, if we don't have information in that space, that's where you start targeting, okay, well, let's start measuring, let's start creating experiments. We can start beginning to understand and improve quality in that space. So small experiments, try and make them cheap and easy to implement, because it's much easier to get those done than trying to get approval from, for large projects. And so if you can find little things that sort of provide a little bit of data, try and keep your experiments data focused so you have evidence. So it's not just me talking about it, it's the data saying it. And you gradually gain credibility in that space. You're not going to do this in 2 months. This is long term. So just think of it as a long-term journey. It's that long road trip. And people are going to be, are we there yet? Are we there yet? No, we're not. This is a journey, you know, and you want to just keep moving in that space and just try and keep focus on the long-term goal of constant quality improvement.
Really fantastic stuff. Thanks again, Anne-Marie. And it looks like we have one more question, this time directed at Frank. What is Kobiton doing to address the inefficiencies and hurdles common in test automation processes?
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you, Drew. We are working, you know, technology's come a long way over the past 5 years, and capabilities that we didn't have 5 years ago are accessible today. And we're using some of those current technologies to help the testers do their job more efficiently and help businesses get their apps out faster and with higher quality. And we're doing that through the ability to have a user execute a manual test on one device type, a Samsung S8, and then rerun those same test steps across every other device type. We're also providing an assertion library that allows us to use a combination of statistical techniques and machine learning capabilities to identify user interface issues, as well as detect crashes and look for anomalies in performance, CPU, memory, and battery. So we're investing heavily in this. We're excited about the opportunity that we have with the customers we currently have, and we're continuing to grow and help manual testers get to automation faster.
Awesome. Well, great stuff. Thank you both for the brilliant presentations. I also want to thank our audience attendees for joining us on this webinar today. Thanks again, Anne-Marie. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you. Thanks, Drew.